I strongly urge people to read his book, The Franklin Cover-Up, and watch the movie Conspiracy of Silence, so you can better digest the information we're going to talk about today. It's just been barely a month, maybe 5 or 6 weeks since you had major back surgery.
Oh, God, yes. I was a captain, infantry captain over in Vietnam, and I was assigned directly to Bill Colby he was officially deputy ambassador there, but he was technically head of the CIA over there. He created something called the Phoenix program, and I was assigned to help him develop and implement that. I was rappelling with the team, and you know what rappelling is? You go down cliffs, real steep cliffs or mountains or whatever.
Do you have any idea how far off the ground you were?
I think it was 40 to 50 feet.
Was it ground or was it rock?
I will tell you the truth, I didn't carefully examine it. It was hard and it hurt, and I had to be carried off. So this is the 5th operation I've had now in the last 5 years, and this was kind of like the ultimate and total one where and each individual disc or vertebrae, they put dead people's bones in, and screws and bolts, and anyway, so that's what they did, and I'm hoping it works, but right now the way it feels, I don't think it is. The CIA had become like a government unto itself, following no rules, accountable to anybody, and he realized that was dangerous for this country, and that's why he went before the Congress of the United States, which resulted in the church committee hearings and all those things.
Right.
You're probably too young to remember.
Well, and Gary Hart was on that church committee.
And went before them and revealed what they called the family jewels, the family secrets, things they had done that crossed the line. Anyway, that was why he wanted me to write this book as a self-defense measure, but also to set the things in pace to maybe try to correct some of these things.
Well, but there's a lot of suspicious circumstances around his death.
Suspicious? Beyond suspicious. I'm sure. In my own mind, I have no doubt.
What do you know beyond
he was killed to shut him up?
The half-eaten meal left on his plate and the computers
first of all,
left on.
You got to know Bill Colby. He was a meticulous, perfect man. He wouldn't have a hair out of place. So here he is on his little vacation place out on Chesapeake Bay or whatever it is, and I'd been there with him before. We'd gone boating, and going boating with him was like not very exciting because everything had to be absolutely perfect. You know what I mean? So here, supposedly, he's by himself in his little cabin. He's eating his supper, got his TV on, and he gets up, leaves his house, supposedly, leaves his TV on, his food half-eaten, lights on, doors unlocked, wanders off and starts to go boating in the evening. Now, not in 100 years, and believe it or not, when I was a young boy, I lived in a monastery studying to be a Catholic priest. I don't think you knew that. Yeah, my lawsuit was the first of its kind in the United States of America, by the way, that for the first time exposed this problem of priests, Catholic priests, having problems with young boys and so on and so forth. There was a place called the Franklin Credit Union. It was run by this man named Larry King, a black man who, as I say, was very prominent in the Republican Party.
In Omaha.
In Omaha, Nebraska. And when all the credit unions and banks were having difficulties back there in the late 80s, early 90s or whenever, his went belly up. And after that, no big deal. A lot of others went belly up across the country. But then stories started floating out on the street that there had been all kinds of money missing. And then the federal credit union officials raided the credit union and found there was $40 million missing. And that's pretty serious. So
now, in your book, didn't you say that that sort of impropriety could not happen without the complicit behavior from the highest levels of the banking institutions?
Which kind of behavior?
I'm not sure.
Either neglect. The credit unions were not very well regulated in Nebraska then. Remember, it was state regulation.
And you were on the state banking...
I was, when I was a senator, I was chairman, head of the bank.
Chairman, okay.
And so, when this word came out that $40 million was missing, then stories started floating all over, publicly, from young people, kids here. Well, I know Larry King. I used to fly on his private plane to Washington, D.C. and provide sex for this or that congressman or this or that public official, and other kids this and that, and so on and so forth. And I was asked by the media my opinion on this, and I said, this has to be the craziest thing I've ever heard of. I said, you can't have that going on. I mean, if that were really occurring, rest assured, it would have been exposed and known a long time ago. And then I got my bluff called a little bit. I got a letter from a kid who had been picked up on the night the credit union was raided. A kid named Paul Benassi. And he was put in jail because he had touched, he was about 17, 18 years old, he had touched his cousin, supposedly, on his private parts on the outside of his pants when they were in bed together at his house. Now, how that warrants taking a 17-year-old kid and locking him up in jail immediately. But anyway, Paul Benassi wrote me this letter. He said, well, Mr. DeCamp, I know you don't believe any of this, but if you come see me, I could show you. I could prove to you that this is true. If he's calling my bluff, I better go see him. So I went to the jail where he was locked up in Omaha, Nebraska. And as I was going in, this other very prominent-looking man was coming out. He was a psychiatrist examining this boy Benassi. And I thought, holy mackerel, this is the guy I want to ask him. I said, well, is he telling you these crazy stories? He said, yes, he is. And I said, I'm sure there's no truth to any of them, but the truth, he says, not only is he telling the truth, he's not capable of lying. I said, what? How can that be? Anybody's capable? He said, well, he is what's called a multiple personality. And I said, what the... Anyway, he said he doesn't lie, he simply switches personalities, and that personality tells what they know. So anyway, I went in to see him, and he told me his story, and then he told me something else. He said, when I was a little boy, my grandpa taught me and made me write a diary. Every day, keep a diary of my life, every day. He said it would be important, blah, blah, blah. He said, so I've done that. And he says, I have a diary of everything going back, when I was just a little boy of my life. And he says, it's hidden, and he told me where it was hidden in some corner of a house or under some, and I thought, well, he says, you can go get it and you can read. So I went and got that and had that examined and learned that the thing had to have been written in those years, because the ink, they can actually analyze, they can take something that was written, let's say, with ink in 20 years ago, and they pretty well can identify the age and if that was really done that in the paper and all that junk, you know what I mean? Believe me, I don't know how to do it, but
yeah.
I had it forensically analyzed by 2 separate outfits, and they concluded, yeah, this was written at this time and over these years. Because when I had originally heard all these stories, I said, if I really believed any of this stuff, I'd be the first to step forward and do something about it. And I realized that, as I say, I was up to my in alligators, because either I had to put my money in actions where my mouth was, or be in my own mind. Anyway, so I started working on this case, and it turned into the biggest monster I've ever encountered, and into a world I did not believe existed, could not believe existed, and even to this day, strange as this is going to sound, terrible as this is going to sound, I'll say it, I wish I knew nothing about it. I wish I were still kind of sweet and innocent, didn't know anything about any of this. It was only after I found and verified and validated my case there that I finally filed this lawsuit on behalf of this boy against Larry King and certain others, including the #1 defendant was the Omaha Catholic Archdiocese and the Catholic Church, and a Catholic priest there.
You successfully got a $1 million judgment on behalf of Paul Benassi, but has he seen any actual money from that?
No, we have not been able to collect. He's been in prison. Well, he's out now. He got released finally, but I don't know whether we'll ever collect.
So he was in from what, 80?
No, in the 90s.
92, 91, 92?
I don't know the exact date.
So just recently?
I'm going to say 90. No, till maybe a year or two ago. Year and a half, whatever.
We got a little come up in Vatican City.
I went to Vatican City. And you you've heard of audiences with the Pope,
Yeah.
right? Well, it's not quite like it sounds like you're sitting there talking to the Pope. You're in a group of maybe 100 people or more, or, but a bunch of people. The Pope comes out and rings a bell and signs. Anyway, and then he says a few words, and that's pretty much it. It's not like you're going to discuss much. I then met personally with this man, and Cardinal, and he looks at me, and I've told him the whole story, and I asked what I should do, and told him about the lawsuit, and he says, keep it up, keep it up, keep it up, keep fighting. He says, the North American church doesn't listen to Rome. We know about this problem, it's very severe, and someday it's going to hurt the church. And so I felt a little discouraged, but I learned, and I just kept working on my project then.
And the name of this cardinal?
And the name of the cardinal was a guy named Cardinal, you can check it out, Ratzinger. Now, then I'm in my office 10 or 15 years later, watching on television, as they say, and now the new Pope, Cardinal Ratzinger. So the new Pope now, the existing Pope, is the one I met with then, and he was the one that told me it's a problem in America and it's out of control. I think this is the first time I've ever told this publicly.
You actually got your audience with the Pope?
So I had my audience with the Pope. It was just a little bit before he became the Pope. But it was interesting because at that time, my lawsuit, as I told you way back then, was the first one in the United States claiming this kind of problem, and the judge threw it out, dismissed, let out the church and the priest. But since then, I don't need to tell you the problem has surfaced, just like Ratzinger told me it would.
You just kind of skirted around your involvement with the Oklahoma City bombing. Is that something that you represented?
I represented the grand juror, Hoppy Heidelberg. Hoppy was on the grand jury, that indicted McVeigh. But he heard enough there that he was upset and wanted to question more, which a grand juror normally has the right to do. See, unknown to most Americans, the grand jury is supposed to be an absolute machine where these people on the grand jury get to bring in witnesses and ask questions. And yes, the prosecutor, so to speak, is the one that arranges it, subpoenas, and brings them. But the prosecutor is supposed to listen to that grand jury. And Hoppy, speaking out for some of the other grand jurors, wanted to bring in other witnesses because information they gathered in the grand jury was that McVeigh wasn't alone. There were some other people and other things that he wanted to bring out. And the judge refused to let him do it and told him he would be punished and put in jail if he kept asking or pressing. So that's when I jumped in representing him and filed an action. And
while the grand jury was still convened?
Yeah, while the grand jury was still convened, and wanted to maintain the building, keep the building up long enough to have a team go in there to examine it. Why? Because there were all kinds of questions about what really happened with this bomb. And I had hired this team. They were the ones that had done the World Trade Center bombing, one of those bombings in New York before. The
1993.
Yeah, I think that was it. They were real prominent. I had them arranged, and at the last minute I got a call from McVeigh's attorney. McVeigh, you know who McVeigh was. And they said, hey, listen, we admire you and applaud what you're doing, but would you let us? Remember, this is a court-appointed attorney. I think, what was his name? I can't remember right now. But they were court-appointed. The government appointed him, to represent him, because supposedly he had no fun. Anyway, and he said, but since we're the main defendant, my client, we would have the highest priority to keep the building standing. And we could guarantee we could do it, whereas you're just representing kind of unknowns that may have an interest. Would you back off and let us have your firm or your investigating company you got on hold to do it? And I said, well, shoot, yeah, you'd be able to get it way quicker and you'd be guaranteed. So I agreed to that. Verbally on the phone when they called me.
Yeah.
And it wasn't 6 to 8 hours later, I'm watching TV. At least it seemed very quickly, not that day, I think. And they said both McVeigh's attorneys And the U.S. government have agreed now to destroy the building, and it'll be destroyed tomorrow morning. Blah, blah. And I went crazy, and I tried calling him. I couldn't get him up.
Had you known, would you have
Something's
not
fishy.
given your consent?
I'm still burning about it, and I still have funny feelings because. Oh, and how did they deal with the issue of the grand jury and my representing Mr. Heidelberg and some other grand jurors to have the grand jury ask more questions? Guess what? Go check the record. Instantly, the judge just dismissed the whole grand jury, so it no longer existed. First of all, the judge threatened to put Mr. Heidelberg in jail. Then when I got involved and started filing stuff, dismissed the whole grand jury. So I guess I've had a few things happen in this whole Franklin thing since I got involved, and that make me wonder sometimes.
I'm going to splice in a picture of that on the wall there.
Oh yeah.
And just to show how.
See the other picture right next to it. You know who that black guy is with me in the picture?
This one right here?
Yep, that's in Washington, D.C. at the Kennedy Center. I was decorated as one of the 8 most outstanding Vietnam veterans for... I went back to Vietnam after I'd been a senator for 5 years, right as Saigon was falling in '75, organized Operation Baby Lift. Did you ever hear of Operation Baby Lift?
Yes, I did. At the
I
time.
went back and organized Operation Baby Lift, brought out 2,834 of the mostly half American, half Vietnamese orphans that were being abandoned.
So who is the black man in that photo?
Hank Aaron. He was the one selected to give the award there.
I'm from Littleton, Colorado myself, and I personally know a lot of the students and parents who were affected that day in the shootings. You were asked by at least one of the families to become involved in that. What was your involvement in?
I filed a lawsuit on behalf of one of the kids. And my fundamental claim was that one of the drugs this boy, Harris, was taking causes teenagers particularly to be suicidal. You follow what I'm saying?
Yes.
And to make a long story short, of course, you're fighting Solvay was the drug company involved. They manufacture whatever the drugs are.
Can you spell that out?
Solvay. I don't. Anyway, and of course the drug companies fight it with a passion and bring in the toughest people in the world. I kept battling, but the amazing thing to me is the careful control. As I say, this is why I've become a little cynical about government, because it seems that at key places there are government officials that don't always do what the people need and want and should receive. Unfortunately and tragically, and I hope it changes someday, I can't talk about certain things. I'm the only person who's taken a deposition of the Harris family, of the doctors that were treating this young boy, and I'm the only one who's seen, other than certain certain officials, all kinds of things in this case that are now sealed, and they're trying to be destroyed, as you know. And in fact, I had 2 federal marshals show up in my office, law office, when the judge ordered these things sealed and record destroyed, to go through my files to take copies of, if you can believe it, certain depositions I had taken. So all I can do now, because I finally stepped out of the lawsuit and the kid settled for, got a settlement of a few $1,000s or something that's secret and whatever. My claim there that these drugs cause a certain amount of children to be very suicidal. Where they just want to do it in a dramatic fashion and so on and so forth. And just study the whole picture of what actually happened there in Columbine. And if they ever release or don't destroy all the records on this case, I think you'll find that is the most accurate lawsuit that was ever filed on this whole thing. But what is most interesting, once the lawsuit was dismissed, and their penny dollars they paid the kid. Once that was done, what has happened since then? The federal government and the drug companies have all reached agreements that on these particular drugs now, these antidepressant drugs, they have to put all kinds of big notices, and that's the first big notice there is on the drug about how they cause suicide in children, so on and so forth, young people. You do know that, right? You can't pick any of those major ones now that isn't there. And I have no doubt that someday, and this is my opinion, so district court officials, you can't do anything, this is my belief and opinion, personal, okay, from just everything. I have no doubt that the drugs were a major factor in this boy committing suicide and, contrary to what most people maybe know or think, executing his own buddy, Klebold there, killing him when Klebold didn't want to die. And you just had to see all these basement tapes they made and know the whole story, and you'd have no doubt that those are the things they won't release or let the public have, and they keep talking about destroying, and I don't know how much has been destroyed now, but if you ever saw those basement tapes and all that stuff, you would have no doubt.
No, I thought the official story was that they each committed suicide individually.
And my answer to that is bullshit. See, Mr. Harris, the boy, had learned to manipulate even the drugs, double up and triple up, then go off them for a few days and get the exciting effects of this and that, and feel like King Kong, you can kill anybody, and he learned the whole mechanism. Has any of that ever come out? No.
And the video games?
The video games, of course, my lawsuit also involved that, by the way. How they lived and breathed those video games. They were real for them.
Tell me about your recent election, because you ran for Nebraska Senator.
Oh, I stupidly...
In 06, right?
Yeah, put my name on the ballot. Just for the heck of it.
What?
I didn't really do any campaigning. I just thought I'd try to get back into politics, and then I had a back surgery, and that pretty well made me lay low and stay out.
But the polling had you go...
The polling had me all
68% or something?
number one. And yes, I lost good.
But only in those precincts that have electronic voting machines.
That's true. Only in precincts with electronic voting machines, and the ones where it's hand counted and all that, I won like 2-1 or more. Paul Benassi is married, has 2 beautiful children, keeps in touch with me every once in a while, and he's a fine young man.
Rusty Nelson?
Rusty, he was the central photographer, and he skipped out and escaped, and he ended up in prison in Oregon, and that's when I got a call from one of the top detectives there, and they said, "Do you ever hear of a guy named Rusty Nelson?" I said, "Yeah." This is way at the height of the Franklin thing. I said, "Yeah." I said, "Are you DeCamp?" And I go, "Of course." And he says, "Well, what do you know about him?" I said, "Well, I know nothing other than he was involved in this Franklin thing." And so I said, "Why?" And they said, "Well, we arrested somebody, and he has this book called The Franklin Cover-Up." It was my first edition when I first... And he says, and he's got all these parts underlined that mention him. I said, "Holy mackerel." And they said, so I went out and saw him.
And that's the first time you...
Absolutely. And he spilled everything to me, which I was able, of course, to add more to the book. And they had seized tens of thousands of pictures, and they let me look at those. Then I tried to get them, and no, then other people stepped in, and I think they've got them destroyed by now. But that was then the next thing I did. The most important thing then was I got Rusty Nelson out of prison back to testify in the case involving lawsuit against Larry King, and he actually was able to get some of his secret pictures he had hidden in different places of Larry King and various other things, and that's how we
into the court record?
Ended up doing big things, along with another key witness in that case, Noreen Gosh, in the famous Gosh case, the first boy that his mother had led the effort to get pictures of kidnapped or children on milk cartons, and became very active because her this Paul Benassi had described how he was involved in the kidnapping of this boy back when they were both 12 years old. They used one boy as, kind of the bait. The other Benassi boy, the Gosh boy was out delivering papers, and there's Paul Benassi out there, 12-year-old kid too, and they stopped, and then these men grabbed him, and Paul told everything and described it. And to make a long story short, the Gosh family, I wrote them in contact and said, I don't know if any of this is true, this strange, weird story, but if you'd like. So they came, they interviewed.
That was your initial contact with Noreen Gosh?
No, that's even more sinister and strange. That was my initial contact with, quote, I'll use the phrase, the Gosh family. With the father, let's say. And
because he kept a lot of evidence from Noreen for years.
I'm not going to go into that.
Now, these boys ended up supposedly on a ranch in Colorado.
Correct.
Colonel Michael Aquino's ranch. Do you know where
I'm not going to go into who owned or didn't own ranches or anything. Michael Aquino is prominently mentioned in my book. Michael Aquino was a very prominent individual, as you know, in the military, and he's been accused of many things, including being involved in this type of activity. I was scheduled for a debate with him in California. They were going to have him on the radio, very prominent station out there, to refute and discount and disprove all kinds of things that were being claimed about him at the time. Not in my book, but all in lots of things. You remember? Lots of accusations were made. And I, unknown to him, was brought in by the radio station to be sitting there ready to debate with him.
I didn't know that.
Oh yes, this is a real event. And at the last minute, he finds out that I'm there. So he refuses then to participate further and quits. And I offer all kinds of things that clearly prove he's full of you-know-what.
Yeah?
I haven't had an OxyContin or even a pain pill in two and a half months now. I literally, on the spot, said I'm not going to take another one, and I don't want you giving me any more shots or anything else. And I never had a single thing from that day forward. I knew something was wrong. My entire office staff was telling me, you're flaky.
And so how long did you feel like it got...
I'd say 13 days. I thought I had been dropped into the middle of hell. When we had the showdown with the doctors, and they were the ones that told me, legally, technically, we think you're addicted because we've put too much in you.
Because we addicted you.
Because we addicted you. Yeah, they made no question about that. Because I didn't take any excess. I just took what the nurses poured into me and everything else. Old doctor says, that's the same thing they had Rush Limbaugh on. I said, oh. I said, so why'd you put me on? He said, well, it's the best thing there is for killing pain, and you had more pain than anybody I've ever known. My scar is literally 3 feet long, goes from my neck down to my you-know-what at the bottom.
Yeah.
And still hurts like a blankety blank.
But you have flexibility. You can actually...
Well, that was why they did this surgery, because it was either that or a wheelchair. And I said, take the risky one, and let's do it that way, and it's worked out. It's still a lot of pain, but I'll live with it.
You think it'll get
better?
better?
I learned a lesson. Stay out of wars in places like Vietnam.
We should all heed that.
Yeah, well.
Yeah. Speaking of Vietnam, what point did you gather around the table at the peace talks?
Oh, this was in the 70s. Well, hell, it might have been in the 80s even. Started out, a friend of mine, a very close friend of mine, a Vietnamese friend who happened to be the son of the man who had been elected president and then was assassinated.
Elected president of
Vietnam.
Okay.
He then and his family pretty well escaped to Paris.
What's his name?
His name was Tran Van Tong. Tran Van was obsessed with getting the story of the Vietnam War and things like what happened to his father and who really did what and everything else out. And so he organized this thing for Paris at exactly the same place and at the same table that they had originally done the Paris peace talks. He got, I would say, the 15 most involved people in that war that there were on the planet Earth, including Kissinger, Colby, the head of the CIA over there, and on and on. Interestingly enough, the generals from North Vietnam and South Vietnam who had escaped and were now refugees, and ambassador, some of the people from Paris that had been involved. And, I mean, he really, and the deal was, and it was good, they did it. It was one of the least covered things in the United States and the most publicized things in Europe and the rest of the world there was. And the deal was, they would give their little talk and then open it up to questions, and they kind of kept the press out pretty heavily because it was going to be one of these open deals. We're going to blow it out straight and give our opinions. I was one of the speakers, by the way.
Oh, I didn't know that.
15 or 20, yeah. An hour talk from the perspective of a young soldier over there who became disenchanted, concerned. We weren't allowed to win. We weren't allowed to lose. That was my famous campaign slogan. And the fact that I had actually run first, last, and only one in the history of the United States to run for senator without ever setting foot in the United States and win the election. That's what I did. I ran the campaign for Vietnam. But maybe the most interesting part for me was I knew Kissinger had been the key man to fire Colby when Ford got elected president, or not elected, when Ford got in as president because of Nixon's resignation. Kissinger, one of the first things he did was made sure he got rid of Colby. Why? I can only tell you what Colby tells me.
Okay.
Colby says the reason was because Colby, had exposed, so to speak, the sins of the war and the sins of the CIA, and gone before the U.S. Congress and said, hey, it is out of control, we need to change it, and embarrassed the administration and everything. And so they got rid of him real quick. But anyway, so when those two agreed to sit down over the lunch hour, which lasted about 2 hours between the morning and then when the afternoon session started, I said, okay if I come along. Goes as okay by me. And maybe the most interesting revelation that I'm absolutely sure is 100% true, even though I've never really seen it anywhere else, that came out was, who was Deep Throat? Who was Deep Throat? You know Deep Throat in the great Watergate thing? And Colby says something to Kissinger like, well, the CIA spent a fortune on that, and I think we have the answer. And Kissinger says, well, interestingly enough, Bill, I think we at the White House had the answer too. And then one said to the other, okay, who do you say it was? And guess what the answer is? Colby says, we at the CIA know there was no Deep Throat. Deep Throat was merely a combination of all the information these guys were getting from different sources, but they had to have something to validate and get the Washington Post to go forward, and so they had this mysterious Deep Throat. So they might have a piece of information from this key person, or a key piece of information, this one in the White House, and so on and so forth, but they had Deep Throat supposedly right up next to the president and everything, validating or proving everything. Kissinger looks at him and he says, Bill, I'm going to tell you something. And I was thinking he was going to tell him, you're wrong, you're full of beans. He says, you just said the only thing you and I have ever agreed upon. And I thought, my God. And so I started asking some questions myself. I said, well, how could they do this and have a fictitious person? And Kissinger says, a young man, and I was a little bit younger then, he said, Colby is absolutely right. And he says, and I'm surprised he and the company meaning the CIA, reached that conclusion, because that's what the White House has known for a long time, and we never disclosed it. And it was kind of funny. Then I watched over the years, somebody saying, oh, so-and-so is Deep Throat, and so-and-so, and then this latest deal where this guy supposedly was Deep Throat. Baloney. what's his name, both Colby and Kissinger that day agreed. They believe on his death or something, he'll leave the information so that they'll realize kind of how great a reporter he really was to have done this, because he got the information, got rid of the president and everything else, and was a completely fictitious character. That's God's truth. I'm not making any of this up. You can give me a lie detector polygraph test. Because I still find it shocking, but the more I've watched, the more believable it is.
Do you see that as parallel to what they're using today as Al-Qaeda?
I developed a real strong policy after my first book came out, because so many people were threatening me, and I thought, man, if I can't prove it to the point where they even have to accept it absolutely, I ain't going to say it. I may give an opinion, I may suggest thoughts with respect to Al-Qaeda. I have really strong mixed feelings because, as you know, I kind of lived and grew up there. Used to speak that lingo, Farsi, Iran.
Can you say something in Farsi?
Shuman Farsi mi donin, Farsi mi donam, es micho machis. Chansaldari.
Now you'll have to translate.
Oh, I said, do you speak Farsi? I speak Farsi. What's your name? How old are you? Where do you live? Well, I majored in philosophy of religions in the world, and that was what my degree was in before I went to law school. The Shiites and the Sunnis, absolutely, the two main sects of Islam, absolutely make the old Protestant Catholic thing look like amateur hour. I mean, they take it serious, super serious, to the point where I don't see how we're ever going to force them, quote, to live together. I think we'll segment them off, let them. Oh, and they have one other rule, more fundamental than anything else, that both Shiites and Sunnis absolutely agree on. If the infidel occupies the Holy Land, then all Muslims have a duty to become martyrs and have the holy war to evict and drive out the infidel.
The jihad?
Jihad. Both of them have the same word.
Now, is it true that the word Al-Qaeda didn't even exist until 8 years ago or something?
My understanding, correct.
And that it literally means the base?
The base or the standard, I don't know.
I've also heard that it was really devised from a database. And I'm thinking that the base...
I have heard that too. Do I know? No. And if I don't know, I don't say.
You don't say.
I heard the same thing.
Last time we spoke, you had great optimism about what Senator Chuck Hagel was doing and where he was going.
Of course, as a consequence, he's not going to be able to run now. Had to drop out because I think he got Mr. Bush so unhappy that...
Because he was doing the right thing.
I think he was doing what he believed in. I think he was doing what he thought was necessary. I think he was doing what he thought represented the people. And I think he was also taking a lot of input from my letter. You've read my letter, right? And did you see that article from 20, 30 years ago that's headlines in the World Herald called me the prophet because I had predicted the oil crisis and the what's his name, who was Ayatollah Khomeini. I predicted, before anybody even heard of his name, I predicted he was going to take over and completely change, and we'd almost be at war with him. And then, of course, they had the hostage crisis and everything.
Well, great prophet, what do you see for Iran?
Let me give you some background and understanding that most Americans don't have. Iran is about 90% Shiite. Most of the Shiites, 80% probably, of all the Shiites in the world are located in Iran. Iraq is where the next biggest group of Shiites are. Even though it's only a fraction of what they have in Iran, it is a majority in Iraq. The most interesting thing of all is the Shiites hate the Sunnis and vice versa, worse than the devil hates holy water, even though they're both Muslims.
You're aware of false flag terror events that have happened. Do you see Yes, do you acknowledge that?
Yes, I acknowledge.
Gulf of Tonkin, which is now declassified. Do you see something similar happening in Iran? Do you predict this as the prophet to justify going to war?
There are those that believe that. I see it as a real possibility.
But you don't know.
I would hope our government had not gone to the lengths that would require to have kind of a secret plan going all on so you can deliberately start a war. You understand?
But
So I hope that's not true. I recognize the possibility and that a lot of people maybe believe that. I sure don't know. I fear something like that. But I
do you
hope
see
not.
our government as being the ones making the ultimate decision in that anyway?
Or do you think it'll be the Iranians?
No, I think it's the global
Oh, yeah.
entity that probably has hands in both governments.
Probably a lot of truth in that,
But
do I know? No.
no,
Do I say if I don't know? No.
no. Okay, fair enough.
Hey, did you hear the story on the news here yesterday or the day before about Senator Ernie Chambers from Nebraska suing God?
Tell me more.
Well, he did. It got all kinds of national news because he was suing God to make a point, and so I've got a copy of the lawsuit here I'm going to give you because who knows?
Did he make his point?
God may reply. Or maybe his prophet.